In April 1977, when Kenner signed the licensing deal to produce toys based on George Lucas's soon-to-be-released film Star Wars, it was too late for Kenner to have any action figures, playsets, or vehicles in stores in time for Christmas of that year. While Kenner very famously sold blank envelopes with certificates to mail away for the first 4 Star Wars action figures, which would be ready by spring of 1978, they still needed physical product in stores to meet the public's overwhelming demand for Star Wars. For this, Kenner relied entirely on paper-based products with quick turnaround times and dipped into their existing lines to utilize existing form factors that could be easily adapted to the Star Wars brand. These initial offerings started arriving in stores in the fall of 1977 and would be the only Kenner items under Christmas trees in 1977. Among these were the Escape from the Death Star board game, 2 140-piece puzzles, one with Han Solo and Chewbacca, the other with R2-D2 and C-3PO, 2 500-piece puzzles, one with the space battle between a TIE fighter and X-Wing fighter, and one with Luke Skywalker and one of his most iconic poses from Star Wars. For the other items, Kenner turned to the Kenner Color Corner product line. But what is the Kenner Color Corner? For the answer to that, let's go back to the origins of the company we knew as Kenner Toys. These days, for toy collectors, the name Kenner is synonymous with iconic toy lines of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Star Wars, Strawberry Shortcake, Care Bears, Superpowers, $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, Mask, Batman, Jurassic Park, and the real Ghostbusters all immediately come to mind. However, it wasn't until the mid-1970s when licensed action figures and dolls became their main output. Before this, Kenner mostly produced role-playing and creative toys. Albert, Philip, and Joseph Steiner were brothers running the Cincinnati Soap Company, based in Cincinnati, Ohio. When Albert Steiner saw a child making soap bubbles, he was struck with inspiration. Fueled by this creative idea, he and his brothers would form Kenner Toys in 1947 and release the Bubble-Matic gun. This would be such a big hit that in 1949 they'd introduce the Bubble L Rocket, which would sell over 1 million units. In 1957, Kenner would introduce girder and panel building sets. These toys were all incredibly popular and remained among Kenner's active toy lines until the 1970s. In 1959, Kenner would add its next iconic toy, the Give-A-Show projector, and in 1963 they'd introduce the Easy Bake Oven. Also in 1963, they'd introduce Presto Paint, a toy with paints conveniently stored in tubes, which made them far more ideal for younger children to use. They reduced mess, and kids would mostly use only the amount of paint they needed. They were also blendable, which would enable kids to create many colors from the primary colors included in the set. In spring of 1960, Kenner would debut Sparkle Paints. They would even offer deluxe kits with both Presto and Sparkle Paints included. Throughout the 1960s, Kenner would introduce sets for both Presto Paints and Sparkle Paints with a variety of licensed characters. Batman, Superman, Marvel superheroes, the Three Stooges, Rocky and Bullwinkle, Popeye, Dick Tracy, and Mr. Magoo were all characters Kenner licensed for their Presto paint sets. In 1966, Kenner would introduce the Spirograph design toy to American consumers after purchasing distribution rights from British engineer Dennis Fisher. Fisher had originally conceived of the Spirograph as a drafting tool. Kenner would see great success with Spirograph and would release an expanded product line over the years. And you can still buy Spirograph to this day. It remains a toy that allows kids and adults to be artistic, creative, and use their imaginations. In 1967, Kenner would be purchased by General Mills, best known even to this day as a food production company. In 1970, Kenner would introduce paint wheels. However, this item had much less impact than Sparkle Paints, Presto Paints, or Spirograph. It did not have lasting power and was gone from shelves within 2 years. Also, in 1970, General Mills merged another company they'd acquire with Kenner Products. This company was Rainbow Crafts. Who is Rainbow Crafts, you ask? Let me tell you. Kenner wasn't the only toy company that had its origins in 1940 Cincinnati. Around the same time, the Rainbow Crafts Company was formed. Initially, its primary focus was on repurposing a wallpaper cleaning putty into the childhood favorite we all know as Play-Doh. And in 1965, Rainbow Crafts and Play-Doh were bought by General Mills. That brings us to Dip Dots, a paint kit with a similar premise to Presto paints and Sparkle paints. It contained paints designed to decrease the mess. Rainbow Crafts introduced Dip Dots in 1967 with heavy TV promotion in top markets, including on Captain Kangaroo, which was one of the top-rated children's programs of the time, and remained on the air well into the early 1980s. Dip Dots were a water-based paint contained in wells in a plastic tray. Kids would dip the included brush into the paint well to get paint. This helped decrease the mess. And the containers were promoted as spill-proof. Rainbow Crafts Dip Dot sets included red, yellow, orange, green, blue, brown, purple, and black. 1971 is the last year sparkle paints were advertised in Kenner's Toy Fair catalog. In 1972, Dip Dots paint sets and the Dip Dots design book first appeared in the Kenner Toy Fair catalog, and this appears to be the debut of the Kenner Color Corner. And the earliest I could find Dip Dots is a Kenner branded product. It's possible that as early as 1970, Kenner was producing Dip Dots under Kenner branding, as the earliest example of Kenner Dip Dots I could find features Kenner's mascot, the Kenner Goonie Bird, with the Kenner Color Corner branding. Kenner used the Goonie Bird mascot from 1962 to 1974. Also first appearing in the 1972 Kenner Toy Fair catalog is Plaints. Plaints is similar in concept to the Presto paints and Sparkle paints, but is an improvement on the concept of contained paints designed to decrease the mess. Plaints was also a Rainbow Crafts product that debuted in the mid-1960s. But more on Plaints in a future video. 1972 appears to be the year that Kenner fully phased out its own paint products in favor of Rainbow Crafts paint sets. I have a Dip Dots design book dated 1972, but the art is dated 1970 and has copyright RCI, which means copyright Rainbow Crafts Inc. 1970. Seeing as how 1970 is the year that Rainbow Crafts was absorbed by Kenner, my guess is that either the original design book released by Kenner was an existing product released by Rainbow Crafts at the time of the merge, or it had been developed for release and didn't see release until later under Kenner. In 1974, a design book with different art would appear on store shelves. In 1974, Kenner would introduce several Dip Dot sets, which included coloring books, the Mural set, Hidden Pictures, and Easy Bright. Each of these had gimmicks that would not appear in future products, and none of these items appear in the 1975 Toy Fair catalog. In 1975, Kenner would add the first licensed property to the Dip Dots line. These sets were based on The $6 Million Man, The Bionic Woman, and Filmation's cartoon, The New Adventures of Gilligan's Island. While the Gilligan set would not be reprinted after 1975, The $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman lines were quite successful for Kenner. These Dip Dot sets would stay in production through the end of Kenner's toy lines for both properties in 1978. In 1977, Kenner would add two more licensed items to the Dip Dots line, Star Wars and The Man from Atlantis. In 1978, Kenner would produce items related to the Tatum O'Neal film International Velvet. This includes a set of Dip Dots. The International Velvet Dip Dot set was the last item to carry the Kenner Color Corner label. There is some belief among collectors that this set never received a retail release. However, there is some evidence in favor of it getting a very limited release. Evidence in favor of the set being produced in limited numbers is that the International Velvet set did appear on cross-sell on 1978 Star Wars Dip Dot set, replacing the now discontinued Man from Atlantis set. They were also listed as part of the Kenner Museum when that was closed by Hasbro in 2000. What happened to the 12 sets stored in the Kenner Museum is unknown, but they do not appear to be among the items Hasbro had sent to Rhode Island. Most likely they were either thrown out by Hasbro and rescued from dumpsters and ended up in private collections or on the secondary market, or they were taken to dumps and destroyed. It's also possible that some of the items marked for the dumpsters were rescued by former employees and taken home to end up in private collections and on the secondary market. If you happen to own one of those International Velvet sets, let me know in the comments, as I'd love to figure out how to get scans of the pages from that book for my collection. In 1980, Kenner would release a Dip Dot set for Strawberry Shortcake, which would not carry the color corner label, effectively ending the subline, despite Dip Dot as a product continuing for licensed sets. It also appears 1980 is the first year the Dip Dots paint set was not sold individually, but only as part of a set. The Star Wars Dip Dot set was not reproduced or reoffered in 1980, and there was no follow-up set for The Empire Strikes Back nor Return of the Jedi. Kenner would release standard coloring books for both of those films from the original trilogy in all markets. The Strawberry Shortcake set would be released with updated cross-sell in 1981 and again in 1983. Also in 1983, Kenner would release a Dip Dot set for their newest licensed property, the Care Bears. The Care Bears would be the last Dip Dot set released, finally ending the long-lived creative toy after 17 years. I do not own all of the Dip Dot set, however through research I've been able to determine that all of the Kenner licensed sets came with the same basic colors that were included with the individual retail release of the Dip Dot set. One notable difference is the Strawberry Shortcake set includes the name of fruits rather than colors, and that set also shares the Strawberry Shortcake gimmick of being fruit-scented. Of the sets I do own, the only color difference is the mural set, which has a second green color instead of brown, called Avocado. My research determined the Easy Bright and Hidden Picture sets, neither of which I own, as well as the second design book set released in 1974, also had Avocado. And here we have my vintage Dip Dot set. This is something I picked up on eBay, so this is not my original childhood one. I never actually had one of these separate sets. Everyone I always had as a kid came with one of the design books, but this is pretty standard. This is a version that was released in 1974. As you can see, it was once owned by Kathy. And again, this was marketed for kids 3 to 8, which of course is around the time you're wanting to teach kids basic sort of art skills, painting or coloring within the lines. So this, again, instant watercolor fun. This was really a cool way for kids to pick up some basic art skills at home. I'm going to go ahead and take it out of the plastic. Alright, and there we are. As you can see, the front of it, this is how it would be on a shelf, and the front of it says easy to use, non-spill, 8 bright, bold colors. These basic sets, and these are the same that came with most of the design books: red, rose, violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, and brown. As you can see, there's basically a sponge in there that is saturated with the colors. Obviously, this is long dried out, but there is a plastic layer between them, and you would push down into the well on that plastic, and the paint would come up from the sponge. If these dried out, you could easily reactivate them with a little water. I have not tried that on any of my vintage sets, and probably won't. I don't have that much nostalgia that I want to risk ruining a pretty decent set. I mean, this is in really good condition. for 1974, 51 years now. Cardboard, other than Kathy scratching her name in there, the rest of this is in pretty good shape for the length of time, especially based on how this is constructed. You've got sort of a box, you know, sort of like that. As you can see, I was really happy to get this one because it has an original price tag on it showing that originally this went for $1.37. The back has Kenner cross sell, which at this point, this was the same year this version of the Kenner logo and the Kenner color corner. The 1974 is the year I've been able to determine that most of these, the look of these started cropping up on products. And then these are the sets that were currently available. Obviously, the dip dots by itself. Plates or poster paints, that's a different video for a different time. But you could buy a picture pack. And that would also come with 4 paint colors. So you could either just get the paints by themselves, or you could buy a set with the paints, kind of like the design books. And this is your basic dip dot design book. This is the second version. I do not have that one. This is the hidden picture set where part of the picture was hidden until you put the paint on it, and then the picture would come to life. And then the dip dots, I don't have that one either. And then the dip dots mural set, I do own this one, and there will be a future video on the set. So basic Kenner cross sell. Interesting though that the back of this was directed to moms rather than to the kids themselves. So some pretty standard sort of back of the box instructions. And then the brush, of course, is sort of hidden down there. I'm going to assume that part of that is just people making sure over the years as this has changed hands that the brush is in fact in the box. But in theory, I don't know if this was ever used by Kathy or not, but in theory, if you were careful, you could actually leave it in this box and still use it. There is normally a plastic sheet that goes across the paint here. That's missing. So I'm going to guess that Kathy probably did use it at least once or twice, maybe, or at least try it out. Or it's possible that that plastic, which was just like a thin layer of cellophane and sort of there with some stickiness, might have fallen off over the last, 51 years at this point. So yeah. So that is a 1974 dip dot set. There is at least one earlier from Kenner that has the older Kenner color corner logo and the Goonie bird, which is the old Kenner mascot. I have not ever seen that one pop up on eBay. Doesn't mean it's not out there. It just means that the people who have it aren't selling it on eBay at this time. I have been able to locate a few pictures. So at some point, one was auctioned off in some capacity, or I wouldn't have been able to find those pictures. Anyway, that's the set. Now let's get to the Star Wars. Now let's circle back to the Star Wars dip dot set. Kenner Canada and Palatoy would both release the Star Wars dip dot set. The only difference is the back of the box. There is no cross-sell on the international releases for Man from Atlantis, Bionic Woman, $6 Million Man, or International Velvet. My set is an international set by Kenner Canada. It's also missing a page. However, I was able to pick up a digital copy from Retro Reprints, so I have the missing page. My primary objective in picking up these sets is to be able to scan and archive the pages to help preserve this fun piece of Kenner history that I have a personal affinity for. And of course, I enjoy coloring the art. In this case, the scan is enough to satisfy all of that and not have me trying to track down another set and spending a lot of money to find it in good condition. The art in all these sets feature bold, thick black lines. Remember, originally these were designed for kids ages 3 to 8 who were learning how to color in the lines. For some kids, this would have been their first paint set. It made it easier to stay in the lines and really helped the bold, bright colors stand out. And the limited color palette meant that kids would have to learn how to mix colors for skin tones and might have to compromise by making Darth Vader in the void of space blue. But it does lend a certain charm and add that kitschy 1970s vintage vibe. For this page I'm going to color today as part of the video, I'm going to limit my palette to only the colors that came in the original set. My one compromise is that I will be using a white acrylic paint pen for certain embellishments. Otherwise, the only colors used are those found in the Dip Dot set that came with the Star Wars book. Now I'm going to put on some music and play the time lapse of me coloring this page.